Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, a glimmer of hope from Washington, D.C. as rescheduling actually might be on the Fed's agenda. The source? An op-ed in the Tampa Bay newspaper by the original Trump appointee for Attorney General, Matt Gaetz. Really? Plus, Republicans in Pennsylvania are late to the legalization movement in that state, but even conservative elements of the GOP says it's a smart, conservative approach. And Virginia's #1 prohibitionist governor, Glenn Youngkin, vetoes a second adult use law handed to him by his legislature. Our Joe Parsons in that Commonwealth not surprised at all in his report from Virginia. And we introduce you to a new member of the Cannabis Coast to Coast News team from California, Yarrow Kubrin.
Now what we're seeing in a couple states is where they are now taking those taxes and reallocating them towards other things.
Plus, get this, the DEA is now bribing young people under age of 21 to submit videos in an anti-420 campaign for next month's Cannabis Celebration Day. Okay, it's a contest run by the Johnny Ambassadors website that is dedicated to sharing the dangers of underage use of cannabis. But I have to ask, why are prohibitionist messages allowed to be public service announcements for the masses, but the industry can't share any positive information about the plant that has saved the lives of adults and kids? Well, you can share those stories here and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who has a great life and is vacationing in Hawaii this week. She'll be back next week. So have you downloaded the PCM TV app yet from the App Store or Google Play? Because if you really care about the cannabis industry, you should. Every week we document the fight to end cannabis prohibition here in this country and around the world with reports from Europe, Canada, and of course coast to coast here in America. All of our correspondents are volunteers for the cause, and when you go on the app and click App Content, you'll see the most viewed news and talk shows we produced over the past 4 years. There really is a lot of history there, and I'm proud to be documenting it with our Cannabis Coast to Coast News team. Okay, let's get to it. We usually start with an update on what is going on with the federal reform effort in Washington, D.C., but over the first 3 months of the new administration running our government right now, it's been pretty depressing. No word from anywhere about when or if the work on reform that has moved the needle a little bit over the past 4 years will ever see the light of day regarding rescheduling. Well, now there's some hope, but it comes from a source that is questionable at best. You might remember a Florida congressman named Matt Gaetz. Well, he penned an op-ed in the Tampa Times newspaper this past week that said rescheduling is still on the agenda for the Trump administration. Now, you have to consider the source here. He is the same guy who was basically thrown out of Congress for ethics violations while he was serving Florida's 1st District. He was under investigation when Trump named him his first choice as Attorney General, but then he resigned his seat in Congress last fall. In that op-ed, it sure sounded like he knows what Trump's administration is up to, and being on the agenda is a positive step, if it's true. With more from Washington, D.C., here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was President Trump's initial nominee for Attorney General, claims that cannabis rescheduling is still happening under the Trump administration. In a recent op-ed, Gaetz credited Trump's leadership for supporting the move to reclassify cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III. Gaetz, who resigned from Congress amid ethics investigations after being nominated, wrote that rescheduling cannabis would acknowledge its medical benefits and remove unnecessary barriers for businesses and researchers. Now, what Gaetz didn't mention was that this rescheduling process was actually initiated under the Biden administration. The process hit roadblocks when a DEA judge postponed hearings amid questions about whether the agency's leadership truly supported this change. Now, while on the campaign trail, President Trump did express support for rescheduling in a social media post and even backed cannabis banking reforms. He even endorsed Florida's adult use legalization measure recently. However, since taking office in January, the president has remained silent on cannabis policy. Complicating matters even further is that Trump's current leadership appointments send mixed signals on cannabis reform. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who replaced Gates as the nominee and was confirmed by the Senate, previously opposed medical cannabis legalization as Florida's Attorney General. And meanwhile, Trump's nominee to lead the DEA, we know the DEA, Terrence Cole, has previously voiced significant concerns about cannabis' potential danger, particularly for young people. Now, one more note from Washington, D.C., and it comes from the FDA. You know, the same organization that was supposed to set up regulations for the hemp industry after the Farm Bill passed in 2018. They've delayed ruling on any use of CBD, a non-intoxicating minor cannabinoid, and has done nothing about that. They've also taken some heat from federal courts over the definition of hemp, currently at 0.3% of THC. Now, the FDA might have it actually done a good thing by coming up with a $13 million grant for cannabis trial with veterans with PTSD. This funding comes from the Michigan Veterans Research Program and will involve 320 veterans with moderate to severe symptoms who will be able to self-medicate in this study. This is supposed to be a few-year program, but is a major breakthrough for veterans who have pleaded for years to allow the VA to treat their conditions with medical conditions. Our Michigan correspondent Amie Carter was busy with her Michigan Weedsters responsibilities this past week that included a lobbying effort at the Michigan State House. Here's Amie with a Michigan report.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week in Lansing, Michigan, the Michigan Weedsters held a successful lobby day to oppose a proposed tax increase on cannabis. Participants reported a strong response from lawmakers, with no representative expressing support for the tax hike and most opposing it. This marks a significant shift from previous years, as advocates found it easier to engage in discussions about cannabis with many lawmakers already familiar with the relevant issues. There was also noteworthy support for Jaden's Law, with several representatives showing interest in its reintroduction. Overall, the event was met with positive reception, highlighting a growing understanding and acceptance of cannabis legislation among Michigan lawmakers. An administrative law judge has ruled that Virtus Laboratories, a cannabis testing company founded by former Michigan State Police officers, repeatedly violated state regulations by using unapproved testing methods and failing to document procedures despite testing a significant volume of cannabis and facing accusations of inflating THC levels. Virtus has continued operations amid ongoing scrutiny from the state's cannabis regulatory agency. The judge dismissed the lab's claims of bias and regulatory overreach, concluding that the CRA's oversight was justified due to the red flags in testing practices, including passing moldy samples. The CRA is now expected to decide on potential sanctions against Virtus, which could include fines or license suspensions. Good news for the city of Warren. Warren City Council passed an ordinance that will pave the way for recreational marijuana establishments to open in the city, despite opposition from some residents. This Saturday is Hash Bash. It kicks off at high noon, and I hope to see you there. I'm Amie Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
You might remember that last year there was a lot of positivity coming out of Virginia when the legislature there passed an adult use of cannabis bill. That was the first time that their governor, Glenn Youngkin, used his veto power to block that one, and now, in a case of deja vu all over again, the nightmare of that governor's poison pen strikes again. This week, he was presented with a bill to create an adult use market, and what do you think he did? Once again, he vetoed it. So, only to suffer the same fate for everyone in Virginia. And I remember how devastated our own Joe Parsons was when that happened last year. Well, here's Joe Parsons with his reaction to last week's veto.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When the hard work of the lawmakers that drafted the cannabis bills for last year's session ultimately failed on the governor's desk, they had hopes that this year the governor would examine the amazing progress that has been made by our neighbors in Maryland. They had also hoped that he might actually look over the states such as New Jersey and their huge, safe and booming market, and the newest adult use state, Ohio, that has seen record-breaking numbers that benefit their state's children and infrastructure. While there have been obstacles to overcome, these states have had proven success in their launches and have seen an actual reduction in legacy market sales. They have safer products and more affordable choices, not just for medical patients, but to responsible over 21 adults as well. This year, however, the governor did not take these facts or the positive recent research studies into account. He basically did a copy and paste in his answers to not one, but to all three of the high-profile cannabis reform bills. For adult use bill SB 970 and HB 2485, he gave an almost identical response as last year, stating that this bill, quote, endangers Virginians' health and safety, end quote. And just like before, quoting non-evidence-based and proven false statements like, quote, states following on this path have seen adverse effects on adolescents' health and safety, increased gang activity and violent crime, significant deterioration in mental health, decreased road safety, and a significant cost associated with retail marijuana that far exceed the tax revenue. HB 2613, the Parental Rights and Protections Bill, and HB 2555, that would have allowed resentencing options for non-violent cannabis-only convictions, also met the same fate as last year. And as expected, they had the same copy and paste responses from last year. Again, ignoring recent studies that prove otherwise, and the great success that was had in Maryland, where Governor Wes Moore actually gave justice to thousands of nonviolent cannabis offenders. There is a chance, however, to overthrow these vetoes when the session reconvenes on April 2nd. However, the majority in the House is very slim and would require some help from our GOP lawmakers. You know I'll continue to keep you updated on all the progress, as well as the continued work to one day enact the will of the people that was supposed to happen over 2 years ago. Well, that's going to do it for the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
The state of New York has made a lot of mistakes during the first few years of its adult use program, but now they might be introducing a reform that is truly earth-shattering. There's a proposal being floated by the Office of Cannabis Management and Governor Kathy Hochul's office to allow consumption of cannabis at movie theaters. Now, if I remember correctly, indoor smoking of cigarettes is banned for public safety reasons, but they're now talking about allowing consumption of cannabis in a movie theater. They can't be talking about actually lighting up a joint, right? Maybe there will be just edibles or tinctures, and I can certainly understand that. But lighting up in a crowded theater, even I had to shake my head on that one. There was one more development in New York market this week, and once again, farmers markets will be allowed to sell cannabis on location. 2 years ago, New York allowed this only to be pulled back in 2024, and now they'll be giving it another shot. Our New York correspondent, Pam Chmeil, is off this week, but she did file an interesting interview in her Mary Jane Society podcast this week with a woman who represents the convenience store industry. And of course, on top of that one, she also has the story of a well-known edible arrangements company that is getting into the edible arrangements cannabis market. Here's Pam.
This is Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmeil reporting from New York. The dominoes are falling fast as major retailers continue to embrace THC beverages. Just this past week, Edible Arrangements launched its new cannabis division, Edible Brands, while Hudson News best known for their airport stores, quietly unveiled its growing cannabis division by securing a New Jersey cannabis distribution license. Yet one major retail segment remains a holdout: convenience stores. The National Association of Convenience Stores, otherwise known as NACS, a powerful and politically influential trade group, has kept THC drinks at arm's length. Because cannabis remains in a legal gray area, NACS prohibits cannabis brands from showcasing at its massive trade show where buyers and brands connect. To dive deeper into the potential of THC beverages in convenience stores, I spoke with Melissa Vanderhauer on the Mary Jane Society podcast. She's a seasoned expert in the convenience store industry and shares eye-opening statistics on why THC drinks are a national fit for the market and how C-stores could be the perfect testing ground for these new beverage brands. Here are some highlights from our conversation.
Tobacco nicotine is their number one seller. They cannot afford to not age gate. They just can't. The convenience stores check more IDs on a daily basis than TSA. You know, the convenience industry, again, reliant hugely on fuel and tobacco. And neither one are great margin drivers for the stores. Whereas THC beverage, especially as it currently is, where there's like no additional taxes, it's a great margin driver for the stores. They also have trade shows. They're smaller, but it's local. And I think there will be ones that will be more open.
Could convenience stores be the tipping point for lawmakers to take notice and realize the magnitude of mainstream acceptance and why they need to pay attention? That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmeil, reporting from New York.
That'll do it for the A Block, our first section of our weekly news show, but don't go anywhere. We've got our international news segment coming up next. And a little bit later on the show, we go on a bud crawl through the Berkshires of Massachusetts as we visit 14 dispensaries in under 24 hours. Don't go away. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Welcome to Sweetgrass.
Cool. Sweetgrass has a window view of a beautiful lake in the Berkshires.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best. In Willow Creek, Rory, renowned for birdwatching, embraced nature's elegance. Preparing for his woodland sojourn, he used grape-focused THC mist from Yellow Labs. Each spritz honed his senses, capturing avian beauty. Immersed in the forest symphony, Rory's lens froze vibrant moments. Emerging at twilight, gratitude filled him for the mist's clarity. Recalling, find Yellow Labs near you. Rory ordered more of his mist from
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I am PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, and this is the B Block, or second section of our weekly Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. This is when we take a look beyond the borders of the United States to see what's going on in other parts of the world. France is moving forward with their reforms, and you know about that experiment in Switzerland? Well, there's been some pushback on that. Here's our European correspondent Ben Stevens, followed by Debi Facey in Canada.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, Switzerland's southernmost canton, the Italian-speaking Ticino, located south of the Alps, voted to wash its hands of involvement in the country's thriving adult use pilot projects. Since 2021, Switzerland has allowed for the small-scale adult use cannabis pilot projects to be launched by the local authorities. These are strictly for scientific research purposes and are intended to provide an evidence base for the best way to legalise cannabis at a federal level in the future, a project Switzerland has recently launched. Despite the wider government's relatively liberal stance on cannabis reform, the Council of Ticino held a heated debate on proposals to launch 2 trials in the region, awash with prohibitionist rhetoric. In the debate, opponents of the bill put forward the widely debunked gateway drug theory and claimed that while pilot projects were presented as harmless and scientifically neutral, they actually contribute to a dangerous trivialization of cannabis, especially among younger generations. More pertinently, they argued that given 7 pilot projects are currently up and running, there was little need to duplicate the results. Proponents of the bill pushed back, stating that given the region's unique social and cultural position, it was vital studies be conducted that are specific to the region. Ultimately, the council voted not to actively participate in the trials, though it's important to note that this doesn't mean they won't be going ahead, as the ultimate decision lies with the Federal Ministry of Health, which is already considering both applications. What this does mean is, as seen in other cantons like Zurich, the local council will not play an active role in the studies, and this could cause issues for their rollout in future. Meanwhile, in neighbouring France, the details of its long-awaited medical cannabis framework were made public this week. As we've covered in previous weeks, at the start of the month, it looked pretty unlikely that France would be moving ahead with its national cannabis rollout at all. This changed significantly over the last few weeks, and details sent to the EU show that France was now not only likely to launch this in the next 12 months, but that the programme would now include prescriptions of flower, something previously considered completely off the table. While flower will be allowed, it will not be allowed to be consumed by smoking, and patients must use specific vaporizer devices to consume. Experts are, however, optimistic for the first time in years and estimate that by 2035 the market could grow to between 300 and 500,000 patients, making it one of the largest markets in Europe. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I'm Ben Stevens from Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. This week, this news report is going to be a little bit different, just going to be involving a little bit of the America, but with the Canada. But with our story today is going to be the Edible Arrangements Company that we knew in Canada for their lovely arrangements of fruits, is going to be entering the edible industry in the States. They have realized and decided to launch edibles.com, which is an e-commerce platform offering hemp-derived THC products, including gummies, beverages, and initial deliveries in Texas, and it plans to expand within the States. Their main idea is to leverage the delivery networks. Edible Brands aims to provide consumers with the convenient aspect of the premium hemp-derived products, partnering with the well-known cannabis brands Wana, Kiva, and Can. This is something that's pretty cool because we know edible arrangements here in Canada, and that's a cool plus. Next, what we have is PAC, which is the Political Action Committee, has released a video alleging that Canada is attacking American cannabis businesses by capitalizing on the federal legalization while U.S. companies face restrictive regulations. I had to read that off the page just due to the fact that that is something that I truly wish I understood, especially due to the fact that us in Canada, to have been legal for the past now 6 years, but we haven't really had the chance to have an impact on America due to the fact that there are 50 states that all have to make their own regulations and laws and rules, and there's one Canada. That's it. We make one rule, and from there we all just have to work with it. So I hope that America overall doesn't think us Canadians are impacting your industry, especially in a negative aspect, because we're all here for the same positive reason, which is to legalize cannabis in the best, informative, safest way possible. This is Debi Facey with your Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast report. Peace.
Now let's bring it back to the States and talk about California, where taxes, lawsuits, busts, and the opening of social clubs continue to drive the conversation in the nation's #1 cannabis market. You should know that California is a pretty big state, so asking one correspondent to cover it all is a little too much. So now we get it from another Northern California correspondent. His name is Yaro Kubrin, and he joins Dina Nagib in the South. Now, Dina was on hand for an opening of a new dispensary called Catalyst in San Diego, located at a former MedMen dispensary.
Let's go. Welcome to the main event. Applying pressure, but I promise I ain't make it dance.
Appreciate y'all. Catalyst, San Diego. We're getting our roots down deeper here. We for the people. Oh!
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Here today with Elliot Lewis of Catalyst.
The jacket's all busted. I'm rocking.
So
keep
we
going.
can start over if you want. No, we're good.
No,
We're going to keep rolling.
I like the authentic, yeah.
So Elliot,
Yes.
we had your grand for San Diego today. That's number 30, right?
32.
32.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah. It was 30. We backed a couple after it, and then we come back grand open this one. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. What does San Diego mean to you? Do you want to just talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just super exciting. We want to make a good effort to get our, really get our roots into the community. I was joking on the way here. Guys are making some more Dodger swag. I was like, we better be a little more neutral with the Padres and whatnot. But no, man, it's just a super cool place. Everybody loves San Diego. Been doing business back in the day down here. A lot of cool different businesses already here. So we're just happy to be, part of the cannabis industry here and hope to get deeper involved in the community.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everything that you do for the community. You have a huge footprint in California. I will say, as a 15-plus year season ticket holder for the Padres, definitely hoping that you can kind of toe that line a little bit. But I appreciate a good competition.
I'm going to get a little more political with the Dodger thing. We love the Giants and the Padres too, but no, just mess around. But yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, everybody appreciates a little healthy rivalry. In fact, some of our buddies we have down here that have stores, they're coming up maybe for the Padres-Dodgers game, so it will be fun. Not to go down that MLB rabbit hole, but just happens to be fresh in my mind as we were chatting about it on the way down here.
I love that. Well, congratulations. Thank you for taking a minute to chat with us today. This is Dina for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Thank you. And one more thing. Remember this. Fire weed, fire prices, weed for the people.
Okay, we've got a very special report here on Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and someone we are very excited to be joining our Cannabis Coast to Coast News team from Northern California, not to be confused with Southern California, which is where Dina Nagib hails from in San Diego. This is Yaro Kubrin. He is from the Northern California area, and he's a second-generation cultivator in California and also a real estate magnate in that area where you have been involved with real estate deals involving the cannabis industry. Yaro, thank you so much for joining us. And I should probably mention that you also contribute to another news team that is the High at 9 live news with, what's his name? Jason Beck and our old friend, Rico Lemit. So you got it all going for you, Yaro. And thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, 2 points of clarification right out of the gate. I'm not a real estate magnate. I'm a real estate mogul, because a mogul is a bump on a hill, and that's pretty much what I am. The second thing is that I am not a contributor to High at 9 News. I am a detractor. They just can't unplug my microphone quick enough. But I tend to make sure that we don't have too much agreement wherever I go. Rounding into the California update for this week, we've got a lot of exciting and not so exciting things happening, some of which are new and some of which are lingering, like an infection that hasn't been knocked out by penicillin. On the infectious side, we've got this increase in taxes that is still poised to act as yet another nail in the coffin for regulated cannabis here in California. And we're seeing some legislation that's been put forth to try to stay that. But again, that's sort of like those people on the Titanic playing violin as the ship is going down. Even if it stays, it doesn't really provide meaningful tax reform. Trailing in the last couple of weeks, we've also seen some exciting stuff around consumption lounges down in Dina's area in Southern California, all the way down in San Diego. And so that's exciting. Rounding out, we just had the Hall of Flowers in Southern California. They do a biannual event, one in SoCal, one in NorCal. Their NorCal one is in September, I think, in Santa Rosa.
Yep.
But they had a great show, and I've heard nothing but fantastic feedback from those that attended the SoCal event recently. We've still got this lingering issue with hemp. We don't have parity between over-regulated cannabis and under-regulated hemp. And I think Gavin Newsom recognizes that if he's going to run for president like everybody thinks he is, he's going to need more than a gravelly voice and great hair. And so he's trying to show that he's tough on something. And right now, that tough on something looks like making hemp the bad cousin. It's the cousin without a fence. And so apparently you're not allowed to fence it here in California. And lastly, we are coming up against the opportunity for people to submit their cannabis products for the California State Fair. This year, we're not going to have an Emerald Cup after 20 years continuous. And so the State Fair is going to be one of the only opportunities for people who are growing, manufacturing, creating products to be able to submit their wares. And this is the first state fair in the history of the country where they're actually not only just testing for terpenes and cannabinoid profiles, but also having judges, that human interaction between the plant and the person. And they're going to take that information like they did last year and award winners. Now, I wouldn't be from NorCal if I didn't point out that about 3/4 of the winners, both in indoor, outdoor, and mixed light last year, were from Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity, Sonoma County.
The triangle. Yeah.
Triangle and triangle adjacent. And so my hope is that people remember that awards matter and that it's not just about the gold, it's about the glory. And so we have a window now for people to submit, and I'm really looking forward to judging it again this year.
As you can tell, Yarrow has a ton of knowledge and passion for the industry in California, where he's been in it for a number of years. You can see the rest of that interview when we release it on Thursday of this week on our website and app. In the meantime, Dina Nagib and Yarrow Kubrin are the dynamic duo from the Golden State for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So what's going on in Pennsylvania, you ask? It's in the race to become the 25th adult use legal state, and the stars are starting to align. The state's legislature there is kind of a frustrating thing because if you are an outsider looking inside at the workings of our federal government and other state governments, it's when one side of the aisle disagrees with the other side, and just because it came from the other side of the aisle. Now, the other party, this is not conducive to civil discussion in order to get anything done for this country. Yes, the Democrats made a lot of noise over the past 4 years, and they moved the needle a little bit on federal reform, but for the most part, they failed when they had the opportunity. Now the Republicans are in control. They see an opportunity for their party to become the heroes in the reform movement. And there's an indication that this might already be happening in Pennsylvania. A Republican lawmaker there, Abby Major, did an op-ed this past week basically saying that Republicans should snatch cannabis reform from the Democrats. In fact, she went on to conclude that accepting adult use in her state would be a smart conservative choice. And you know, there's been quite a few surveys and polls comparing the use of the cannabis plant by these two political parties, and it still remains to be seen in Pennsylvania if they can deliver the next adult use legal state. In the meantime, they have a governor there, Josh Shapiro, who's already supporting that in his State of the State address, and the timing may be right in 2025. Next up is Arizona with Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona is not immune to the battle over hemp-derived intoxicants. As I reported this past December, Attorney General Chris Mays outlawed the sale of Delta-8 THC and other intoxicating hemp-derived products by non-licensed retailers. Fast forward to March 24th, and Mays doubled down, sending a warning letter to retailers, giving them a month to comply before enforcement kicks in. This move effectively restricts all THC product sales to licensed dispensaries, sparking debate over its impact on the CBD market and potential legal challenges from the hemp industry. Down the street at the legislature, there's renewed hope for those wanting to expand access to adult use and medical cannabis in Arizona's rural areas, specifically cities with 50,000 or fewer residents and no dispensaries within 25 miles. Senate Bill 1713 failed to advance, but SB 1057 rose from its ashes. The new bill is a striker, meaning it completely replaces the old language. It aims to issue 18 rural opportunity licenses, which would only allow operators to relocate to other underserved areas. Plus, it mandates the state issue nonprofit medical dispensary certificates to those with marijuana establishment licenses. While some industry folks are pushing back, arguing there are plenty of dispensaries, supporters say it's a must for economic growth and patient access in underserved rural areas. Down in Tucson, there's a new location to get your doobies at a drive-thru. D2 Dispensaries opened its third location in partnership with Halo Cannabis March 21st. Back up in the Valley of the Sun, there were several cannabis-related events. The Marijuana Industry Trade Association's monthly networking event, Maggie Jane's Mocktail Hour, and blunt brunches pouring into Power Tea Party celebrating Women's History Month. Also, the Arizona Department of Agriculture held its 6th annual Agribusiness Roundtable and Water Council meeting in Tempe, and Arizona NORML held its April chapter meeting at Bud's Glass in Phoenix. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Well, that'll do it for the B block of the Cannabis Coast to Coast News Show this week, but we have more, including 2 stories you don't want to miss. One is about a new contest being run by the DEA to engage the under 21 youth of this country in an anti-420 video contest, and you can even make a few bucks for the yearly celebration of cannabis culture on 420. And how many dispensaries do you think you could visit in 2 days in your state? We'll show you how I did over the weekend when I figure it all out as we check out the Berkshires in the western part of Massachusetts. Don't go away. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break. Welcome back to the final section, or C block, of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, filling in for the vacationing Elena Pinto, who I promise will be back next week. Final reminder, please download the PCM TV app at the Google Play or App Store. It's free, and there you will find the most watched videos PCM TV has produced over the past 4 years. Each one of the news shows has over 10,000 views on YouTube, and there really is a documentation of the fight to end cannabis prohibition on that app. If you're interested in joining our staff of contributors, please reach out to me at jimmy@procannabismedia.com. Another legal state that continues to battle with their elected officials is Ohio. The Republican-controlled Senate in Ohio is trying to roll back many of the voter-initiated changes to cannabis laws in that state. The populace is not happy with their current lawmakers, and their governor, Mike DeWine, he would like nothing more than have this issue go away. In fact, he'd probably like the industry to go away as well, although he likes those heavy tax loads, I am sure. In the meantime, let's check in with our Ohio voter and advocate for the cause, Christina Brisson.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Ohio sales have topped over $2.5 billion as of March 15th, and we've opened a new dispensary called Nectar in southwest Ohio, strategically placed just on the other side of the Indiana border where cannabis still remains illegal. But as we see new stores open and new products coming, CBD store owners are afraid they're about to go out of business. These new House and Senate bills propose that CBD is now sold in dispensaries, receive a 15% tax, and only those people over the age of 21. But not to end everything in just bad news, it is April, and this festival is coming up just around the corner. The Ohio 420 Cannabis Festival, of course, on 420 in Jacobsburg, Ohio, free for everyone to attend, so get out and participate. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report, and I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
No Oregon report this week from Marianne Cursetjee as she takes off a few weeks to launch her Alibi brand in New York State. That state of Oregon has seen a lot of violence against dispensaries, a recall of products for mold and other growths, and now they're turning to the hemp products. By definition, hemp should only have 0.3% of intoxicating cannabinoid THC in dry weight if you measure it. Now, humans being humans, a loophole in the Farm Bill of 2018 that legalized the cannabis sativa plant in that hemp form has backfired now. There's a rogue billion-dollar market for all those hemp-based beverages, flowers, edibles, and vapes, all derived from the same plant and measured in order to be considered to be hemp. But now in Oregon, they're testing hemp products, and what do you think they found? More THC than it's supposed to be in there. Now they have a real problem because not only are these products being sold in Oregon, but the labeling does not reflect the makeup of the hemp, and when tests far exceeds that 0.3% limit, you got trouble. Researchers from that state's Compliance Commission conclude that the results of their secret study showed widespread non-compliance with state and federal laws. This should really come as no surprise to anyone who's been part of the legacy or illegal market for the past century of use of cannabis in this country. The attempt by states and the feds to control the plant, limit its potency, and track it from seed to sale has been so poorly initiated, this whole legalization movement has been a boon for the still existing illegal or legacy market. Now, trying to control either side of the plant is going to be very difficult, yet many states believe that Oregon are trying just to do that. In the meantime, let's go to Oklahoma and check in with Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It, and this is the Oklahoma Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Eagles Farm, a family-run cannabis business in Muskogee County, was raided on June 14, 2021. Melinda Halliburton and her family suffered the devastating loss of over 60,000 plants, chopped, burned, and destroyed. Halliburton described the experience as a targeted attack, a family business dismantled by racism and stereotypes, stating they used several government agencies to destroy medicine we were proudly growing to save lives. After nearly 4 years of legal battles, her fight for justice ended on February 14th, when her case was dismissed with one charge deferred without conviction. We celebrate her resilience and her victory. Meanwhile, the Texoma-Hittah high-intensity drug trafficking area released a 79-page report painting a misleading picture of Oklahoma's cannabis industry. The report exaggerated statistics, reinforcing outdated reefer madness narratives. It claimed that adult past month cannabis use increased by 162% from 2019 to 2022, compared to pre-legalization years. While the report highlighted increased hospital visits, it clearly stated that all referenced incidents were non-fatal, further proving that cannabis does not cause death. Our very own Jimmy Young stated, "What isn't explained, as usual, is the fact that of course there is increased use. It's legal and available. Emergency room visits are because people aren't used to stronger cannabis that is now accessible. They need education about what to do when they get too high. These things happen in all new states. Think about it. States legalize the plant but fail to educate the public, and in fact, they ban licensed, knowledgeable professionals from advertising or sharing any of the health benefits when consumed responsibly." It has been suggested by an inside source that similar reports may surface in other states ahead of upcoming elections, aiming to sway public opinion against cannabis. In conclusion, we cannot keep electing people who are against cannabis and expect to get favorable legislation. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Next up, it's all about our friends from the indigenous community and the tribal lands who are very quickly carving out a nice chunk of the billion-dollar market of cannabis. When it comes to following that trend, Tina Tasaka has that covered.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis, Coast to Coast News. Impactful words were delivered by Chairman Thomas Fowler, St. Croix Chippewa Indians of Wisconsin, at the State of the Tribes address at the Wisconsin Capitol, March 18th. During his address, he discussed Indigenous sovereignty and the urgent need for legalization of medical cannabis. In his speech, he recognized support from the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, ICIA, and the Wisconsin Tribal Task Force on Cannabis. This tribe and the leadership is looking at data, and the chairman describes the deep suffering to the tribes due to opioid addiction. This leader states that medical marijuana assists with addiction, pain management, epilepsy, post-traumatic stress, and more. Please watch an excerpt from this eloquently delivered message from Chairman Fowler.
Naya's story isn't unique. Overdoses have nearly wiped out a generation of our tribal nation's mothers and fathers. Through the regulation of medical marijuana in the state of Wisconsin, we can work towards moving people off highly addictive drugs which are killing our people. Recent data indicates that in this state of Wisconsin, where cannabis is not legal, there is a 25% reduction in opioid use and overdoses.
UNLV's Cannabis Policy Institute continues deep forensics into Nevada's cannabis industry. Recent meetings discussed Nevada's cannabis industry is well positioned for future interstate commerce, putting Nevada fifth in a report analyzing which states may thrive when federal restrictions ease. Currently, state lines act as walls due to marijuana's Schedule I classification, preventing businesses from selling across state borders. While cannabis in Las Vegas remains pricey, costs have significantly dropped, making the state more competitive. Despite its strong tourism industry, Nevada hasn't fully capitalized on its 41.7 million visitors due to restrictions on strip sales. Experts suggest potential solutions like kiosks in non-gaming areas or to integrate cannabis into the state's hospitality and entertainment sectors. Nevada's ranking as a dark horse in the top 5 highlights its potential for growth, especially if federal legalization opens the door for interstate trade. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The stock market is going crazy, but that doesn't bother a seasoned day trader veteran like Doug Miller. He's always high on Wall Street. This week, he takes a look at Tilray.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Tilray Brands announced that the company will release financial results for its third quarter fiscal 2025 ended February 28th, 2025 before financial markets open on April 8th, 2025. They also announced the lawsuit against the company had been dismissed in Massachusetts court. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around 66 cents with some recent pullback. It does appear it wants to run up a little bit, but this market is super choppy, so you have to trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
And finally tonight, a very disturbing story about a sneaky move by the DEA to counter the 420 cannabis celebration that happens to fall on April 20th, Easter Sunday this year. Now, I don't spend any time on Instagram, but I know how popular it is among young people. It's their practice of censorship and shadow banning for people in the cannabis industry that really makes me mad. Now, the DEA is never going to be shadow banned for this promotion they are supporting to create messaging by young people that is anti-420. Why don't we just call them all prohibitionists. The DEA is encouraging young people to post and also send in their short videos with their anti-THC messages. They could win $25 or $50 if chosen. This contest has been organized by the Johnny Ambassadors Foundation, a group of cannabis prevention activists who are asking that on April 20th, they want to flood Instagram with their anti-THC messages. They are urging young people to share their own stories and provide education on why young people should not use THC. How about the fact that it's an adult product over 21? Can we start there? Does anybody think this is fair anyway? Is this how we should be educating our kids? So public service announcements that are anti-cannabis are okay to share with the masses, but any story about the positive effects of this plant medicine should be banned. Do you have any idea how many young people's lives have been saved and changed who use this plant for medicinal purposes? The DEA will not be sharing those stories, even though the anecdotal evidence is overwhelming. I could probably rant a lot more about this subject, but the bottom line is we need to educate all consumers about the impact this plant can have on your life. Now, if you consume it responsibly and get educated, perhaps there is a way to find it. It's not for everybody, but pushing the envelope to see just how much they can get away with, that's what young people do. And it's up to the parents and the adults to guide them and put parameters and boundaries on their activities. Now, I'm just looking for balanced messaging, preaching education and responsible use. Okay? Okay? That'll do it for this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmie Young, reminding you all that it is a whole new world of weed out there, so please consume responsibly if you choose to do so. I now leave you all with some video from the Yellow Labs bud crawl that in the Berkshires of Massachusetts that I took part in over this past weekend. 14 dispensaries in all in under 24 hours, and only one that wouldn't allow me to take any video footage. And no, I won't name that one. In the meantime, I will tell you that Elena Pinto will be back next week.